Welcome back to The Frequency. You're tuned into Channel 19 Mysteries, and I'm your host, Midnight Rider. They say the air at 15,000 feet is thin enough to play tricks on the mind, to make you see things that aren't really there. But what happens when two seasoned truckers hauling heavy steel through the frozen, pitch-black switchbacks of the Andes see something that refuses to disappear? We're heading to a desolate stretch of road on the border of Chile and Peru, a place where the laws of nature seem to bend and where a simple pack of stray dogs hides a secret so terrifying that it has veteran drivers refusing to take the route after dark. So, check your mirrors, lock your doors, and if you want to join the convoy into the unknown, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below. Now, let's get into tonight's story. Skinwalker of the Andes. Tonight's story takes us to one of the most unforgiving, desolate, and visually stunning environments on planet Earth. The high-altitude mountain passes of the Andes, specifically the treacherous routes that connect the borders of Chile and Peru. The events you're about to hear have been whispered about in trucker diners and static-filled CB radio channels across South America for years. It is a story that involves a cryptid so deeply unsettling that seasoned, hardened truck drivers will outright refuse to take certain routes after dark. This is the true, documented account of the Skinwalker of the Andes. To fully understand the sheer terror of this situation, you first have to understand the environment where this took place. The Andes mountain range is the longest continental mountain range in the world, forming a continuous highland along the western edge of South America. When truck drivers transport heavy machinery, raw copper, or commercial goods between Chile and Peru, they cannot just take a flat, easy highway. They have to navigate routes like Route 11CH or the winding, vertigo-inducing switchbacks that climb out of the Atacama Desert and into the sky. When we say into the sky, that is not an exaggeration. These roads routinely reach elevations of 14,000 to 16,000 feet above sea level. At that altitude, the environment becomes openly hostile to human life. The air is dangerously thin, containing a fraction of the oxygen found at sea level. People who travel up there without acclimating often suffer from sorach, or altitude sickness, which causes blinding migraines, nausea, dizziness, and extreme confusion. But it isn't just the lack of oxygen that makes these passes deadly. It's the sheer isolation. Once you leave the coastal cities and begin the endless climb into the mountains, civilization simply vanishes. There are no gas stations. There are no streetlights. There are no emergency services. If your truck breaks down, or if you slide off the icy, unbarricaded cliff edges, you are completely on your own. The landscape turns into a barren, freezing desert of rock, ice, and sweeping winds that can flip a tractor trailer right off the mountain. It is an environment that commands absolute respect. And for the veteran truckers who drive these routes, it is a place governed by strict, unwritten rules. You check your brakes, you carry extra oxygen in the cab. You never ever stop on the side of the road at night. And according to the deeply rooted local folklore, you never look out your window if you feel something running alongside your truck. The real names found in this case are Carlos Gutierrez and his co-driver, Mateo Rojas. In the winter of 2018, Carlos Gutierrez was a 52-year-old veteran of the South American trucking industry. Carlos was the kind of guy who had diesel running through his veins. He had been driving heavy rigs since he was barely 18 years old, navigating everything from the humid, muddy logging roads of the Amazon basin to the freezing, whiteout blizzards of the Patagonian South. He was a stoic, practical, and highly experienced driver who did not believe in ghosts, ghouls, or urban legends. He believed in mechanics, physics, and a steady paycheck. He had a wife and 2 daughters back in Lima, Peru, and every grueling haul he took was to ensure his girls could afford to go to a good university. His co-driver on this particular run was a 26-year-old man named Mateo Rojas. Mateo was relatively new to the high-altitude runs. He had spent a few years driving smaller commercial box trucks along the coastal highways, but he had recently upgraded his license to handle the massive 18-wheelers, specifically for the higher pay that came with the cross-border mountain routes. Mateo was engaged to be married, eager to prove himself, but he was also understandably nervous about the Andes. He had heard the stories every young driver had. Their vehicle was a heavily modified Kenworth W900, a massive, powerful beast of a truck designed to haul extreme weight up steep inclines. On this trip, they were hauling over 40,000 pounds of industrial steel pipes from a port in northern Chile across the high Andean passes and down into southern Peru. It was a route Carlos had done dozens of times, but because of delays at the port loading dock, their schedule had been thrown way off. Normally, Carlos preferred to make the highest, most dangerous part of the climb during the early hours of the morning, when the sun was up and visibility was clear. But because of the delays, they didn't hit the base of the mountain pass until late afternoon. By the time they began the serious ascent, the sun was already beginning to dip behind the jagged, snow-capped peaks of the Andes. As the Kenworth began its slow, agonizing crawl up the mountain, the transition from day to night was rapid and brutal. In the high mountains, once the sun disappears, the temperature plummets instantly. Within an hour, the ambient temperature outside the cab dropped from a comfortable 60 degrees Fahrenheit to well below freezing. Inside the cab, the heater was blasting, creating a cozy, almost suffocating warmth. The massive diesel engine roared, a constant, deafening hum as Carlos expertly floated the gears, keeping the RPMs high enough to pull the massive weight of the steel pipes up the steep grade. The air was getting thinner, and both men could feel the familiar, uncomfortable pressure building behind their eyes, the early warning signs of the altitude. Mateo was sitting in the passenger seat, staring out the window, but there was nothing to see. Beyond the reach of their high beams, the world was an abyss of absolute pitch-black darkness. There was no moon that night, and a thick, freezing fog was beginning to roll down from the higher peaks, clinging to the asphalt and reducing their visibility to just a few dozen yards. "How are you holding up, kid?" Carlos asked, keeping his eyes glued to the white line on the edge of the road, which was the only thing preventing them from tumbling thousands of feet into the unseen valleys below. "I'm fine," Mateo replied, though his voice was tight. My head is pounding a bit. The air feels thin." "Drink some water," Carlos advised, pointing to a thermos between the seats. "And chew on some of those coca leaves we bought at the last station. It helps with the soroche." We're about to hit the highest point of the pass. Once we crest the top, it's a long, steady downgrade for the next 100 miles. "You can sleep then," Mateo nodded, taking a sip of water. The radio on the dashboard was completely dead, emitting nothing but a low, rhythmic hiss of static. They were far beyond the reach of any broadcast towers. It was just the two of them, the roar of the engine and the endless, winding ribbon of asphalt. By 1 a.m., they had reached the highest plateau of the pass. They were sitting at roughly 15,000 feet above sea level. The truck was moving at a steady, cautious speed of about 45 miles per hour along a relatively straight stretch of the high-altitude plateau before the steep descent would begin. The fog had cleared slightly, revealing a desolate, lunar-like landscape of jagged black rocks and patches of gray snow illuminated by the truck's headlights. It was right around 1:15 a.m. when Carlos saw them. Up ahead, caught in the extreme limit of the Kenworth's high beams, were several low-slung shapes moving on the right shoulder of the road. Carlos instinctively let his foot off the accelerator, resting it over the heavy air brake. Up here, hitting a wandering alpaca, vicuña, or guanaco could completely destroy the front grille of the truck, puncture the radiator, and leave them stranded in the freezing wilderness. But as the truck drew closer, the shapes became clearer. It wasn't livestock. It was a pack of stray dogs. Now, to anyone from North America, seeing a pack of stray dogs at 15,000 feet in the middle of a freezing, uninhabited mountain range might seem incredibly bizarre. But in parts of South America, packs of feral dogs are a known, tragic reality. They often wander along the highways, surviving off garbage thrown from passing vehicles, or scavenging the carcasses of animals hit by trucks. There were 3 of them. They looked exactly like you would expect feral mountain dogs to look. Gaunt, scruffy, their coats matted with dirt and ice, ribs pressing hard against their skin. They were huddled over something on the side of the road, likely roadkill, tearing at it with their teeth. Just some strays, Carlos muttered, relaxing his foot and pressing back down on the accelerator. He didn't want to lose his momentum. He planned to just blow right past them. Mateo leaned forward, looking through the windshield as the massive truck closed the distance. Man, how do they even survive up here? It's freezing. They're tough, Carlos replied, keeping his eyes on the road. Usually, when a massive 40-ton 18-wheeler comes roaring out of the dark, blasting its diesel engine and lighting up the night, feral animals will immediately scatter. The instinct for self-preservation kicks in, and they dive off the road into the brush or the rocks to hide. But as the truck closed to within 50 yards, these dogs did not scatter. In fact, they didn't even flinch. 2 of the dogs remained hunched over their meal. But the third dog, the largest of the 3, a massive, mangy creature with dark, patchy fur, stopped eating. It slowly turned its head to look directly at the approaching truck. Carlos expected the dog to dart out in front of the wheels, so he gripped the steering wheel tightly, ready to hold the truck steady if he hit it. He wasn't going to risk swerving and rolling the rig for a stray dog. The truck roared past the pack at roughly 50 miles per hour. Carlos glanced in his massive side view mirror, expecting to see the dog shrinking away into the red glow of his taillights. Instead, what he saw made the blood in his veins turn to ice. In the passenger side mirror, illuminated by the running lights of the trailer, the large dark dog had detached itself from the pack. It was running alongside the truck, but it wasn't running like a dog. Carlos blinked, shaking his head, assuming the thin air and fatigue were playing tricks on his mind. He looked back at the road ahead, then quickly snapped his eyes back to the mirror. The dog was still there, and it was keeping pace with the truck. The truck was doing 50 miles per hour. No normal dog can sustain a sprint at 50 miles per hour, especially not uphill, and especially not at 15,000 feet where there is barely enough oxygen to breathe. But that wasn't the most horrifying part. As Carlos stared into the mirror, his mind struggled to process the biomechanical impossibility of what he was looking at. The dog was not running on all fours. As it matched the speed of the massive Kenworth, the creature's body began to contort. Its spine arched violently, snapping upward with a jerky, unnatural motion. Its front paws lifted off the asphalt. The dog stood up. It didn't just rear up on its hind legs for a moment like a circus trick. Its hind legs elongated, the joints popping and shifting, the muscles bulging unnaturally beneath its mangy fur. The creature's torso straightened out, completely vertical. Its front legs hung uselessly against its chest, swaying slightly with its momentum, resembling the shriveled arms of a T-Rex. And it was running. It was sprinting perfectly on 2 legs, taking long, incredibly powerful, human-like strides. And it was matching the truck's speed exactly. "Mateo," Carlos whispered, his voice trembling in a way it never had before. "Mateo, look in your mirror." Mateo, who had been adjusting the heater dial, looked up. He turned his head to the passenger side window and looked into the large side mirror. For a few seconds, the cab of the truck was completely dead silent, except for the roar of the engine. Then, Mateo let out a sound that Carlos would later describe as the sound of a man completely losing his grip on reality. It was a high-pitched, breathless gasp of pure, unfiltered terror. "What is that?" Mateo shrieked, pressing his back hard against the driver's side of the cab, trying to get as far away from the passenger window as possible. "Carlos, what is that?" "Don't look at it," Carlos barked, though he himself couldn't stop checking his own mirror. "Just look straight ahead." The truck was now beginning the long downgrade. Carlos shifted gears, pressing the accelerator. The speedometer climbed 55 miles per hour, 60 miles per hour, 65 miles per hour. Navigating a fully loaded 18-wheeler at 65 miles per hour down a steep, winding mountain pass in the pitch black is virtually suicidal. The trailer was beginning to sway slightly, the massive tires screaming against the asphalt as they took the sweeping curves. But Carlos couldn't stop. He was operating purely on primal, adrenaline-fueled panic, because no matter how fast he went, the creature outside the window kept perfect pace. It was now running right alongside the cab, mere inches from the passenger side door. In the glow of the truck's amber running lights, Mateo could see the terrifying details of the thing. It was roughly 6 feet tall while running upright. Its body was covered in patches of dark fur and bare, grayish skin that looked leathery and diseased. Its chest was heaving, but it didn't look tired. Its strides were impossibly long and smooth, gliding over the broken asphalt with terrifying grace. The creature's head was turned sideways, looking directly into the passenger window, right at Mateo. And this is where the story shifts from deeply unsettling to profoundly horrifying. When you see a dog, its eyes are fundamentally animalistic. They have large irises, minimal visible white sclera, and they reflect light in a very specific, glowing way due to the tapetum lucidum in the back of their retinas. The creature running beside the truck did not have dog eyes. As it stared through the glass at Mateo, who was practically hyperventilating, Mateo saw that the creature's face was a grotesque hybrid. Its snout was elongated and canine, its jaw slightly open, revealing rows of jagged, yellowed teeth. But its eyes were entirely, unmistakably human. They were set deeply into the skull, featuring white sclera, distinct colored irises, and dark pupils. And they did not glow in the dark. They possessed a cold, terrifying, and deeply intelligent malice. The creature wasn't just chasing the truck like a dog chasing a car, it was studying them. It was hunting them. The expression in those human eyes conveyed a sinister amusement, as if it found their panic entertaining. "It's looking at me!" Mateo screamed, covering his face with his hands, sobbing uncontrollably. "Carlos, it has a person's face! It has human eyes!" "Hold on," Carlos yelled. The veteran driver slammed his hand onto the Jake brake. The massive engine brake engaged, emitting a deafening, machine gun-like roar that echoed violently off the mountain walls. Carlos was hoping the sheer, terrifying volume of the engine brake would scare the creature off. It didn't. The creature didn't even flinch at the noise. It simply continued to run, its two powerful hind legs pumping with mechanical precision, its human eyes locked onto Mateo. Suddenly, the creature leaned closer to the truck. Its shoulder scraped against the heavy metal of the passenger door. The sound of its claws or skin dragging across the door sent violent shivers down both men's spines. Mateo completely broke down. He unbuckled his seatbelt, crawled over the center console, and wedged himself onto the floorboards behind Carlos's seat, curling into the fetal position and covering his ears, praying loudly in Spanish. Carlos was now completely alone at the wheel, fighting to keep the massive, speeding rig on the road. The curves were coming faster now. He had to rely on every ounce of his 30 years of driving experience. He was rapidly pumping the air brakes, trying to keep the heavy trailer from jackknifing and pushing them over the cliff edge. The smell of burning brake pads began to fill the cab, a terrifying scent for any trucker on a mountain descent. He glanced quickly at the passenger window. The creature was still there, running, staring. Its human eyes were now locked on Carlos. Carlos felt a primal, instinctual urge to jerk the steering wheel to the right, to crush the abomination against the side of the mountain face. But the logical part of his brain, the veteran trucker, knew that if he did that at 65 miles per hour with a 40,000-pound load, the truck would roll, and they would both be crushed to death in the cabin. So, Carlos did the hardest thing he had ever had to do in his life. He forced himself to look away. He locked his eyes entirely on the road ahead. He gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned completely white, his forearms cramping with the exertion. He focused entirely on the white lines, the upcoming curves, and the mechanical feedback of the truck. He ignored the scraping sounds on the side of the door. He ignored the rhythmic, heavy thudding of the creature's 2 feet hitting the pavement right outside the window. He ignored the overwhelming aura of dread that had permeated the cab. For a full 10 minutes, this high-speed, nightmarish chase continued down the twisting mountain pass. 10 minutes might not sound like a long time, but when you are trapped in a metal box with an impossibly fast, upright running cryptid with human eyes staring at you, every single second stretches into an agonizing eternity. The road began to straighten out as they dropped lower in elevation. The air was getting slightly thicker. The intense, freezing fog began to lift. Carlos was pushing the truck to the absolute physical limits of its design. The speedometer was hovering near 75 miles per hour, a suicidal speed for a loaded commercial vehicle on a mountain pass. Then, suddenly, the heavy, rhythmic thudding of feet outside the window stopped. The scraping sound against the door ceased. Carlos kept his eyes glued forward for another 2 miles, refusing to look. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He was sweating profusely despite the freezing temperatures. Finally, as the truck hit a long, flat stretch of the lower valley, Carlos dared to glance at the passenger side mirror. Nothing. Only the red glow of his taillights reflecting off the empty asphalt and the dark mountain walls. He looked at the passenger window. Empty. "Mateo," Carlos gasped, his voice raspy and completely drained. "Mateo, it's gone." Mateo didn't move from the floorboards. He stayed curled up, weeping quietly, completely traumatized by what he had just witnessed. Carlos didn't slow down. He didn't pull over. He kept his foot heavy on the accelerator until he saw the bright, welcoming sodium lights of a Chilean border control checkpoint and weigh station about 20 miles down the road. When Carlos finally pulled the massive, smoking rig into the illuminated parking lot of the weigh station, he engaged the parking brakes, killed the engine, and just sat there in the sudden, ringing silence. His hands were shaking so violently he couldn't even unbuckle his seatbelt. He climbed out of the cab. The cold air hit him, but it felt amazing. He walked around to the passenger side of the truck. The heavy metal door was covered in a thick layer of road grime and frost. But running right along the center of the door, at exactly the height of the window, were 3 long, deep, parallel scratches that cut straight through the dirt and into the paint. Mateo eventually climbed out, his face pale and sunken. He looked at the scratches on the door, then looked at Carlos. Neither man said a word. They walked into the small, brightly lit diner attached to the weigh station, ordered black coffee, and sat in a corner booth, staring blankly at the table. An older trucker, a man who looked like he had been driving the Andes since the roads were made of dirt, noticed their expressions. He walked over, holding his own mug of coffee, and slid into the booth across from them. He looked at Carlos's shaking hands, then at Mateo's pale face. "Route 11?" the old trucker asked in a low, gravelly voice. Carlos slowly nodded. The old trucker took a sip of his coffee. "You saw the dogs, didn't you?" Mateo flinched, his eyes snapping up to the older man. "How? How do you know about that?" The old man leaned in close. "Because I don't drive the high pass at night anymore. None of the old-timers do. You boys are lucky. The ones that try to outrun it, or the ones that panic and swerve. They find their trucks the next morning at the bottom of the ravines. The police always write it off as fatigue or brake failure." The old man explained that among the indigenous populations of the Andes, and among the truckers who traverse their lands, there are legends of beings that are not entirely human and not entirely animal. In North America, the Navajo call them skinwalkers. In the high Andes, they have different names sometimes associated with the dark shamans or the Karasiri. These are entities that inhabit the desolate, high-altitude regions, taking the form of local animals, often stray dogs or llamas, to blend in. But when they hunt, they discard the animal act. They stand on 2 legs, utilizing a terrifying supernatural speed and strength, targeting isolated travelers who dare to cross their territory in the dead of night. They feed on the terror, the panic, and ultimately, the crashes they cause. Carlos Gutierrez and Mateo Rojas survived their encounter. Carlos eventually quit driving the high mountain passes, taking lower-paying routes along the coast to stay out of the high altitudes. Mateo Rojas, traumatized by the human eyes he saw looking at him through that glass, quit the trucking industry entirely just a few weeks later. But the legend remains. To this day, if you ask a veteran trucker at a diner in Arica, Chile or Tacna, Peru, about the dogs on the high pass, they will tell you the exact same thing. If you are driving the Andes at night and you see a stray dog on the side of the road, whatever you do, do not look in your rearview mirror. It makes you wonder what else is waiting up there in the thin air, hiding in the blind spots of the Andes. Carlos and Mateo were lucky enough to make it back to the weigh station, but we know that not every driver on Route 11 is so fortunate. I want to turn this over to you. What do you think was running alongside that Kenworth? Was it a skinwalker, a Karasiri, or something ancient that we don't have a name for yet? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, go ahead and hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed to Channel 19 Mysteries so you never miss a haul into the unknown. And listen, if you've seen something out on the open road, whether it's a glitch in reality, a creature that shouldn't exist, or just a feeling you can't shake, I want to hear about it. Send your stories to mycreepyencounter@gmail.com. Your experience might be the next mystery we unravel. I'm your host, Midnight Rider. Keep your eyes on the road, check your mirrors, and most importantly, stay safe out there.